The sun hasn't yet risen over the savannah, but someone is already on the old termite mound. A huge clay tower, cracked from the heat and rain, stands amid the tall grass like a small fortress. Inside, in a tangle of narrow tunnels, an entire family sleeps. Several dozen tiny predators, curled up in a single warm ball. And outside, on a dry acacia branch a few meters from the entrance, a bird sits. It's not flying away. It's not looking for breakfast elsewhere. It's simply waiting. This bird has a huge yellow-orange beak, almost incongruous for its body, and an attentive, unblinking gaze, directed precisely at the dark opening in the termite mound. A little more time will pass, and it will call, a sharp, croaking cry that will echo across the awakening savannah. And then, inside the clay tower, movement will begin. Why would a wild bird rise before dawn and fly to this particular termite mound? It doesn't lay eggs here, doesn't build a nest in these cracks. It has no obvious reason to be here, except one. Those it waits for every morning, year after year, sleep within, as if it had an appointment with them. Did you know that in the savannas of East Africa, there exists a pair that scientists call one of the most unusual examples of cooperation between two completely different animal species? In this episode, we'll explore the identity of these tiny predators living in huge families in termite mounds, why a bird with a gigantic beak acts as both an alarm clock and a guard for them every morning, and what each side actually gains from this strange alliance. We'll discover the risks of such a friendship, whether it's a coincidence or the result of years of proven trust, and why nature once again proves that to survive, you don't have to be big. Sometimes, all it takes is being part of the right team. Like and subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. The termite mound in question had long been abandoned by its original builders. The termites had abandoned it, and the sun-dried clay walls had become the perfect fortress for a new host, the dwarf mongoose, Helogale parvula. This is the smallest predatory animal on the African continent. An adult weighs just over 200 grams, and its body length, including tail, rarely exceeds 40 centimeters. Essentially, this animal is slightly larger than a large squirrel, but with the character and habits of a true hunter. Dwarf mongooses never live alone. They are among the most social predators on the planet. Their family groups, which scientists call clans, can include 10 to 30 individuals, and sometimes more. The clan is led by a dominant pair. They usually produce offspring, while the rest of the group, including adult siblings and offspring from previous litters, help care for the young, forage for food, and guard the territory. This is a rare example of an animal community structured almost like a single organism, where each individual plays their role for the survival of the whole. Termite mounds are their primary home. An abandoned clay tower offers something almost non-existent in the open savanna: protection. Thick walls shelter the mongooses from the heat during the day and the cold at night, and a complex system of internal passages allows them to quickly hide at the slightest sign of danger. A single family rarely stays in one termite mound for long. Typically, the clan changes homes every few weeks, moving to a new location within their territory. The reasons can vary: accumulated parasites, depleted food supply, or sometimes simply the need to confuse predators that have learned the family's old route. And herein lies the main problem of dwarf mongooses. For all their organization and intelligence, they are catastrophically vulnerable. Their small stature, which helps them squeeze through narrow termite tunnels, works against them in open terrain. Grass, knee-high for an adult human, is, for a mongoose, an impenetrable jungle, making it impossible to see what's going on around them. And the savannah is full of predators ready to take advantage of this blindness. Snakes, jackals, wildcats, And, most dangerously, birds of prey, spiders, short-toed eagles, and hawks that attack suddenly and almost silently from the sky. This vulnerability is the key to understanding why mongooses would need an outside ally at all. A palm-sized animal simply can't simultaneously feed, watch over its young, and scout for danger in the sky. Nature rarely gives anyone the ability to do everything alone. And that's where a bird comes in. The toko hornbill, most commonly the Deccan's toko, Tocus deckeni, named after the German explorer Karl Klaus von der Decken, is a striking figure on the savanna. Its large, slightly curved bill, bright orange or yellow, is visible from afar, and the bird itself is about the size of a large pigeon, but with a much longer tail and a distinctive, almost theatrical stance. It seems to survey the area from above, assessing its surroundings before taking its next step. Hornbills feed primarily on insects, beetles, grasshoppers, termites, and small lizards, and occasionally seed some fruits. And here's where things get interesting. Hunting insects in the tall savanna grass is no easy feat for a bird its size. Grasshoppers hide, beetles burrow, and spotting prey among the dry stems is a challenge even for a bird's keen eyesight. But mongooses have something the bird lacks. Tiny paws that constantly dig the ground, rummage through the litter, and turn over stones and old branches in search of their own prey, beetles, grubs, millipedes, small rodents, and lizards. And every time a clan of mongooses emerges for their morning feeding and begins scurrying about in the grass, dozens of insects, startled by the commotion, leap out in panic. For the hornbill, this is a ready-made buffet, set in motion right before its eyes. Scientists observing such mixed groups in the wild, specifically in Weza National Park in Uganda, have documented a consistent pattern. Hornbills do indeed prefer to hang out near colonies of dwarf mongooses rather than hunt alone. And this isn't just a matter of chance. The bird flies to a specific termite mound, home to a specific mongoose family, long before the mongooses wake up, and patiently waits for them to emerge. The colony's awakening is not an instantaneous process. Before the entire group leaves the safety of the termite mound, the mongooses first post scouts, one or more animals that cautiously peer out, sniff, and look around, checking for any danger nearby. Only after this signal does the rest of the colony begin to emerge. And then, observers noticed something unusual. A hornbill, waiting for its moment on a branch, or right on the ground, at the entrance to a termite mound, often lets out a loud cry when the first mongooses appear. A sharp, croaking sound, hard to confuse with anything else in the morning silence of the savanna. Some researchers believe this cry is simply an expression of the bird's own excitement, realizing that feeding and hunting for disturbed insects will soon begin. But other observations suggest otherwise. The mongooses themselves, apparently, perceive this cry as a kind of signal, hastening their own awakening and exiting the termite mound, as if the bird becomes an additional alarm clock for the entire colony. At first glance, the situation seems perfectly clear. The bird is using the mongooses as convenient chasers of insects, and the mongooses themselves are unaware of it. A classic example of one species exploiting the behavior of another for its own benefit, without providing anything in return. But nature is rarely so simple, and upon closer inspection, the picture begins to change. The fact is, a hornbill sees the savanna completely differently than a mongoose rummaging through the grass. Perched on a branch or hovering low above the ground, it has a much wider field of view. A bird of prey gliding high in the sky, a snake slithering through the grass a few dozen meters away, or a jackal approaching from downwind. All of these are much easier to spot from a bird's eye view than from the vantage point of a small animal barely knee-high to an adult human. When a hornbill spots danger, its response is the same sharp alarm call, but of a different nature, more abrupt and insistent. Observers of mixed groups of mongooses and hornbills have repeatedly observed that after such a call, the entire colony instantly freezes or scatters for the nearest shelter, long before the animals themselves even see the source of the threat with their own eyes. The resulting picture is almost symmetrical. The mongooses feed the bird with their scurrying in the grass, and the bird protects the mongooses with its cries. Of course, no contract or conscious agreement was signed between them. From a scientific perspective, such relationships are usually called mutualism, a form of interaction between species in which both parties benefit. But the question remains open even for the researchers themselves. To what extent is this a survival strategy developed over centuries, and to what extent is it simply a fortunate coincidence of interests that each generation of animals rediscovers? There's another detail that makes this story particularly intriguing. Scientists who have observed specific groups in the wild for years have noticed that the bond between a single mongoose family and a single hornbill, or pair of birds, can persist for a long time, sometimes for several years in a row. This isn't a chance encounter between strangers in the savannah every morning, but something akin to a permanent, established, working relationship between specific animals who seem to recognize each other and rely on each other day after day. The question arises, what happens if one morning the familiar bird fails to arrive at the termite mound? Will the mongoose colony become more vulnerable without its aerial sentry, or have the animals long ago learned to cope without outside help? The answer to this question, and even more surprising details about how deeply intertwined the lives of these two species are. Imagine a termite mound, the very one we've known since dawn. But this morning, the familiar acacia branch is empty. The hornbill hasn't arrived. Perhaps it found prey elsewhere, or perhaps something happened to it. The savannah spares no one. And now the mongoose colony awakens on its own, without its usual noisy alarm clock. Does anything change in their behavior this morning? As it turns out, yes, and quite noticeably so. But first things first. To understand how tightly the hornbill is woven into the daily life of the mongoose clan, it's worth following the entire morning, as it was recorded by researchers who spent hours lying with binoculars near termite mounds in the wild. Even before the first rays of sun, when the savannah is tinged with grey-blue tones and the air is cool, the hornbill has already taken up its post. Most often, it's the same branch, low, with a good view of the termite mound entrance, but close enough to hear the first sounds of movement within the clay tunnels. The bird can sit there for 20 to 30 minutes, sometimes longer, almost completely motionless, only occasionally turning its head. Inside the termite mound, everyone isn't asleep at this time either. Adults are among the first to awaken, often those who have been on sentry duty for several times. Behavioral observations show that dwarf mongooses have a peculiar division of responsibilities within the clan. While some continue to sleep, curled up to conserve heat, others emerge to the exit and remain there for a few minutes, sniffing and listening. And it's at this moment that the hornbill's cry often rings out. It's not a single sharp call, but a series of repeated sounds, as if the bird is calling the colony, communicating, "I'm here, everything is calm, it's time to leave." Zoologists who have studied the frequency and character of these calls note that they are noticeably different from the alarm calls of the same bird when it spots a predator, more rhythmic, less harsh, and without the characteristic panic in the intonation. The mongoose scouts, hearing this sound, seem to receive additional confirmation of the safety of the outside world. After this, the colony begins to emerge as a whole, first one or two animals at a time, then the entire group, including the young, who stay closer to the center, surrounded by adults on all sides. It's important to make a fair disclaimer here, one that all serious researchers on this topic adhere to. Proving with 100% certainty that the bird's cry is a conscious signal specifically for mongooses, and not simply a secondary sound of its own pre-hunt excitement,
is extremely difficult. Scientists suggest that a combination of factors is at play: the bird's natural behavior, anticipating an imminent feeding, and the mongoose's long-established association between this sound and a safety signal. It's believed that this bond develops gradually through learning throughout the life of an individual colony.
Young mongooses, raised in a family that interacts with the same bird for years, literally absorb this habit, perceiving its call as part of their normal morning routine, just like their own scouting calls. This isn't an innate instinct encoded in the genes, but, apparently, an element of cultural behavior passed down from generation to generation within the group. This is precisely why the bond between a specific mongoose family and a specific bird can be so strong. It's not an abstract species helping an abstract species. These are literally familiar animals that see the same neighbors day after day and gradually develop a behavioral pattern based on years of shared experience. To understand why a bird's alarm call is so valuable to mongooses, it's worth comparing how each of these animals perceives the world around them. The dwarf mongoose has excellent eyesight, adapted for hunting small prey at close range, beetles, lizards, and millipedes hiding in the grass and under rocks. However, the animal's field of view when walking on the ground in dense grass is extremely limited. It is physically unable to simultaneously look down, searching for food, and up, tracking the silhouettes of birds of prey in the sky. Attacks from above are one of the main causes of death for dwarf mongooses in the wild. Short-toed snake eagles, bald eagles, and other avian predators can attack virtually silently, diving from great heights in a matter of seconds. The hornbill is in a much more advantageous position in this regard. Perched on a branch or hovering low above the ground, it gains a panoramic view of the surrounding area for tens of meters. Its vision, like that of most birds, is well adapted to detecting movement at a distance, an ability critical to the bird's survival, which also requires timely detection of its own enemies. This creates a peculiar division of labor, literally vertical. The mongooses control what happens at ground level and in the grass, while the bird assumes control of the sky and more distant areas. Neither side can completely replace the other in this role, which is precisely why their joint presence is so beneficial to both. Did you know that this kind of role assignment is not uncommon in nature? But it's in this particular alliance that scientists note an unusually high degree of predictability and consistency. In most similar examples, the interaction is rather random and episodic. Animals end up nearby simply because they feed in the same place, but they don't form stable, long-term bonds with specific individuals of another species. In this case, however, researchers have recorded for years how the same birds return to the same mongoose families after the latter have moved on to several termite mounds in a row. That is, the bird is clearly following not just a convenient location, but a specific group of familiar animals. If we were to sum up what happens between these two species every morning, the picture would look something like this. The hornbill has a stable, predictable food source. Instead of spending hours searching tall grass alone, expending energy and risking missing prey, it can simply follow a colony of mongooses throughout the day, picking up insects disturbed by their incessant burrowing activity. This significantly reduces the energy expenditure on hunting, a factor crucial for survival in the African savanna, where food availability fluctuates greatly depending on the season. Mongooses, in turn, gain an additional early warning system, a kind of living radar that monitors the surrounding area that the animals themselves are physically unable to detect. Given the tiny size of the dwarf mongoose and the abundance of predators ready to exploit its vulnerability, even a few extra seconds of warning can literally mean the difference between life and death for an individual or even the entire colony. It's important to understand, however, that neither the bird nor the mongoose sacrifices anything for the other in the usual human sense of altruism. There's no conscious self-sacrifice here. It's a system constructed by nature, in which one species' concern for its own survival accidentally proves beneficial to the other. Sometimes this is precisely how the strongest alliances in the wild are born, not from noble motives, but from cold calculation, which, over time, begins to look remarkably like true friendship. But there's another side to this story, one far less touching. Is the bird's cry always timely? What happens to a mongoose colony on those days when the system fails and a predator outpaces the alarm? And can we even say with certainty that this relationship benefits both parties equally? Or is one actually taking significantly more risks than the other? There are no perfect security systems, either in humans or in the wild. And the alliance between the hornbill and the dwarf mongoose, no matter how well-oiled it may seem, also fails from time to time. And these failures can cost lives. Researchers who have spent years observing mixed groups of mongooses and hornbills in the wild faithfully document not only successful warnings, but also tragic exceptions. A bird of prey, attacking from a great height, can be quicker than even the most attentive sentry. A snake, stalking not from above, but along the ground, is sometimes so undetectable that even a hornbill notices it only at the last moment, if it notices it at all. There's another risk factor that should be addressed frankly. The hornbill itself is not immune to error. It may be busy hunting, distracted by another object in its field of view, or simply not close enough to the colony at the time to notice danger. Scientists suggest that the effectiveness of this alarm depends directly on a number of variables: the distance between the bird and the group of mongooses, the height of the grass, the time of day, the lighting, and even the individual experience of the individual. In other words, this alliance is beneficial, but far from flawless. It's not a ready-made natural insurance policy, but rather a statistical advantage. Colonies regularly associated with hornbills are, on average, in a more advantageous position than colonies without such proximity. But this doesn't guarantee absolute safety for anyone. One of the most intriguing questions, still a subject of scientific debate, is how consciously each party chooses to continue this interaction. Is the dwarf mongoose capable of literally recognizing a specific bird and trusting it more than a random feathered neighbor? Is the hornbill capable of forming something akin to an attachment to a specific family of animals, rather than simply benefiting from the first suitable colony it encounters? There's no definitive answer to these questions yet, and this is a case where it's fair to say the phenomenon isn't fully understood. Behavioral ecology, the science of how and why animals behave in certain ways, has observations that support the stability of such relationships over long periods of time. But definitively proving the existence of anything resembling conscious partner choice in animals is extremely difficult. Nevertheless, the very repetition of this behavior, year after year, in different colonies, in different parts of the habitat of both species, suggests that this is not a random coincidence, but a strategy entrenched by evolution, one that has proven sufficiently advantageous to persist over many generations. Perhaps neither the bird nor the mongoose ever thinks about this alliance in the sense we are accustomed to. But their behavior, repeated with almost ritualistic precision every morning, seems remarkably similar to something far more than the mere chance association of two species in the same savanna. Returning to that termite mound at dawn where our story began, what actually happens between these two such different animals every morning? On the one hand, this is certainly not friendship in the human sense. Neither the bird nor the mongoose feels emotional attachment to each other. Their behavior is dictated primarily by the need to survive and utilize the available resources of the surrounding world as efficiently as possible. On the other hand, calling this simple exploitation of one species by another would also be inaccurate. The mutual benefit is too obvious. The bond between these individual animals too stable and repeatable to attribute it to a simple coincidence of interests. Perhaps the most honest description of what happens between the hornbill and the dwarf mongoose is something like this. It's a form of trust, born not from feelings, but from cold, natural calculation. A trust that didn't need to be explained in words or sealed with a contract. It formed naturally because it proved beneficial to the survival of both parties. And this, perhaps, is one of the most astonishing things wildlife can teach us. Alliances aren't necessarily built on affection. Sometimes, they're built on a simple yet infallible logic. It's easier to survive together than alone. So, the next time you see a video or photograph of a bird with a disproportionately large beak perched next to a termite mound, patiently waiting for its tiny inhabitants to awaken, remember, this isn't a chance encounter between two animals. It's the result of generations of evolution, which has built one of the most elegant and practical alliances found on the African savanna. And every morning, when the sun rises again over the dry grass, this story repeats itself, without words, without agreements, but with a near flawless precision, honed by nature itself. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more amazing examples of how animals find each other in the wild. And in the comments, let me know what you think. Is what's happening between the hornbill and the dwarf mongoose a true friendship, a mutually beneficial relationship? Or perhaps you see something completely different? We'd love to hear your thoughts.